an Adirondack ice storm, retired Navy SEAL Ethan Cole watched a snow-covered German Shepherd rise on two shaking hind legs, press one paw against its chest, and stretch the other toward him. Only Ranger knew that secret signal, and the military had declared him dead 4 years earlier. Then a black SUV appeared through the frozen darkness, and Ethan realized his lost partner had escaped from something that was still hunting him. The black SUV remained motionless, beyond the reach of Ethan Cole's work lights. For one suspended second, the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then the wind returned with a scream, driving needles of ice across the mountain road and swallowing the vehicle behind a shifting wall of white. Ethan stood beside the open door of his utility truck, one gloved hand gripping the metal frame. At 42, he was a tall, powerfully built man whose body still carried the disciplined posture of a career soldier. His shoulders were broad beneath a weather-beaten charcoal parka, and his dark brown hair, cut short out of old habit, was threaded with gray above the temples. A narrow scar crossed his right eyebrow and continued toward his cheek, giving his otherwise calm face a permanently severe expression. People in Saranac Lake often mistook Ethan's silence for hostility. He was not cruel, nor was he deliberately unfriendly. He simply measured every word before releasing it, as though conversation were another dangerous room that had to be cleared carefully. 4 years earlier, an explosion at a military training facility in Eastern Europe had ended his career, taken 2 members of his team, and supposedly killed Ranger, the German Shepherd who had served beside him for 6 years. Ethan had returned home with damaged hearing in his left ear, a badly repaired shoulder, and a guilt that had never stopped moving. The dog in front of him swayed. "Ranger," Ethan said again. The name came out rougher than he intended. The German Shepherd's coat was almost invisible beneath the crusted snow. What should have been a rich black and tan pattern appeared pale beneath layers of ice. His ribs showed sharply along his sides, and one rear leg trembled more violently than the other. Yet his eyes remained fixed on Ethan. Dark brown, alert despite the exhaustion, recognizing him. Ethan took one careful step forward. The dog's ears shifted toward him. The left ear had a small triangular notch near the tip. Ethan stopped. That notch had come from a section of broken fencing during a night search in Romania. Ranger had forced his way through an opening too narrow for his body because Ethan had been trapped on the other side. The injury had required 6 stitches, and Ranger had spent the entire treatment trying to steal gauze from the medic. There could be no mistake. The military had declared him dead, but Ranger was standing in the road. "Come home," Ethan whispered. The words had once been a command used only between them. During training, Ethan would touch one hand to his chest and extend the other. Ranger had learned to copy the motion before returning to his handler's side. It was never entered into an official training manual. It was not a tactical command or a demonstration for superior officers. It belonged only to them. Ranger tried to take a step. His front paws slipped on the ice. The German Shepherd collapsed into the snow. Ethan moved before the dog struck the ground. He dropped to one knee, catching Ranger beneath the chest and shoulders. The dog felt frighteningly light. His wet fur carried the smell of frozen mud, pine sap, blood, and something faintly medicinal. Sedatives. Ethan recognized the chemical odor from military veterinary tents. "Easy, partner." Ranger gave a weak, broken sound and pushed his nose against Ethan's wrist. Beneath the glove, Ethan wore an old leather watch strap marked by years of use. Ranger sniffed it, then pressed his muzzle harder against Ethan's hand. The contact shattered the last of Ethan's doubt. 4 years disappeared. He saw a concrete corridor burning beneath emergency lights. He heard alarms, collapsing metal, and Ranger barking somewhere beyond the smoke. He remembered 2 soldiers dragging him away while he fought them with one functioning arm. He had shouted Ranger's name until his throat bled. 3 days later, an officer placed a report beside his hospital bed. Military working dog R417. Presumed deceased. Recovery impossible. Ethan had signed the document with his left hand because his right shoulder was immobilized. He had believed the report because believing it was easier than imagining Ranger injured and alone. Now that same dog lay shaking in his arms. "I should have kept looking," Ethan murmured. Ranger's tail moved once beneath the snow. A weak sweep. Forgiveness, or perhaps simple recognition. Ethan did not deserve either one. The radio clipped to his coat crackled. "Cole, respond." The voice belonged to Mara Keene, the county emergency dispatcher. Mara was 55, short and solidly built, with cropped silver hair and a voice made rough by 30 years of night shifts and bad coffee. She was practical, impatient with excuses, and one of the few people in town who spoke to Ethan without treating him like a damaged weapon. "Cole, the search team lost contact with base relay. Are you at the repeater?" Ethan looked toward the communications tower above the road. Its warning light flashed weakly through the storm. He had driven up the mountain to repair the frozen emergency relay so rescuers could locate 2 missing climbers trapped near Copper Ridge. He had been 10 minutes from finishing the repair. Then Ranger had appeared. "Mara, I found an injured dog," Ethan said. There was a pause. "How injured?" "Severe hypothermia, possible trauma. He needs a veterinarian immediately." Another burst of static filled the radio. "The rescue team still has no stable channel. Those climbers have been missing 6 hours." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. 2 lives remained somewhere above the tree line. Ranger was failing in his arms. The road behind him was being watched by strangers. Every choice felt like abandonment. "Can the backup team reach the lower relay?" Ethan asked. "I can send Owen, but the pass is closing." "Send him." Mara understood from his tone that the discussion was over. 10 minutes, Ethan. Then you get off that mountain." The radio went silent. Ranger suddenly stiffened. A low growl formed deep inside his chest. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The black SUV had emerged again through the storm, now less than 50 yards away. Its headlights were dimmed. Snow covered most of the windshield, but the shape of a driver was visible behind the glass. No license plate reflected beneath the rear lights. Ethan slowly shifted Ranger behind the open truck door, using the reinforced steel panel as cover. With his free hand, he pulled out his phone and raised it toward the SUV. The vehicle reversed immediately. Its tires spun once, throwing snow across the road before it vanished around the bend. Ethan captured only a blurred image of darkness and 2 fading red lights. Ranger tried to rise. "Stay down!" The German Shepherd ignored him and dragged one front paw beneath his body. His head remained turned toward the road, ears forward despite his exhaustion. Still guarding, still working. Ethan loosened the dog's new collar to help him breathe. His fingers found something cold beneath the matted fur, a small metal emblem attached beside the buckle. He turned it toward the truck's work light. A black raven with its wings spread wide had been stamped into the metal. The symbol meant nothing to Ethan, but the collar was new. The leather showed fresh tool marks, and dried blood darkened the material around the buckle. Someone had owned Ranger recently. Someone had restrained him, and someone had followed him into the storm. Ethan removed his parka and wrapped it tightly around the dog. Beneath the layers, Ranger's body trembled uncontrollably. "You found me," Ethan said, lifting him into his arms. "Now I'm getting you out." He placed Ranger across the passenger seat and covered him with an emergency thermal blanket. Before closing the door, Ethan rested his bare palm beneath the dog's muzzle. Ranger touched the scar below Ethan's thumb with his nose, then his eyes closed. The emergency relay above them continued flashing through the storm. Somewhere beyond the mountain, rescuers searched for two missing climbers. Somewhere behind the curtains of snow, the black SUV waited or circled back. Ethan climbed behind the wheel and started the engine. For 4 years, he had believed Ranger was buried beneath the ruins of a foreign training facility. Tonight, the truth had crawled out of the darkness, wearing a raven around its neck. And it had brought danger home with it. Ethan drove down the mountain with one hand on the wheel and the other resting against Ranger's neck. The storm hammered the truck from both sides, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Ranger lay across the passenger seat, beneath the silver emergency blanket, breathing in shallow, uneven bursts. Every few minutes, Ethan felt for the pulse beneath the dog's jaw. It was fast, weak, and frighteningly irregular. He had called ahead before losing the last reliable stretch of radio signal, and a light was already burning above the rear entrance of Morgan Veterinary Clinic when he reached Saranac Lake. The building stood at the edge of town beside a frozen creek, a converted brick firehouse with broad garage doors and a faded wooden sign shaped like a paw. Ethan stopped so sharply that the truck slid sideways across the snow before the tires caught. The rear door opened before he could sound the horn. Dr. Claire Morgan stepped into the storm wearing green surgical scrubs beneath a long navy winter coat. At 39, Claire was tall and lean, with auburn hair twisted into an untidy knot, and gray-green eyes that seemed to notice injuries before people admitted they had them. Fine lines had appeared around her mouth during the 18 months since her husband's death, and there was a careful restraint in the way she carried herself, as though every emotion had been sorted, labeled, and locked away before beginning the day. She had once been warm and openly humorous with nearly everyone in town. After Aaron's fatal crash, kindness remained, but it had become more deliberate. Claire no longer trusted comforting explanations simply because they were easier to accept. "What happened?" she asked. "Exposure, blood loss, possible sedation," Ethan replied as he lifted Ranger from the seat. "He has an old injury in the right hind leg." Claire moved aside immediately. "Bring him in." The clinic smelled of disinfectant, damp fur, cedar shavings, and the coffee Claire routinely forgot to drink. Ethan carried Ranger into the treatment room and approached the stainless steel examination table. The moment the dog saw the shining surface, his entire body changed. His eyes opened wide, his front legs stiffened, and a low, frantic sound rose from his chest. Though he barely had the strength to lift his head, he tried to push away from the table. "He's afraid of it," Claire said. "He was never afraid of veterinary equipment." "He is now." The words struck Ethan with more force than accusation would have. He lowered Ranger onto the rubberized floor rather than the table. Claire crouched several feet away, keeping her movements slow and visible. Ranger watched her hands. His lips pulled back slightly when she reached for his shoulder. "I need to examine him," she said, "but I'm not going to force him onto that table." A quiet voice came from the doorway. "Use Dad's blanket." Mia Morgan stood in the hall, holding a folded wool blanket against her chest. Claire's 13-year-old daughter was small for her age, with thick auburn brown hair cut unevenly at the shoulders and the same observant eyes as her mother. She wore an oversized gray sweater, dark leggings, and striped socks without shoes. Since Aaron's death, Mia had developed the habit of disappearing into sketchbooks whenever conversation became too painful. She rarely interrupted adults, but when she did, it was usually because she had seen something they had missed. "You should be upstairs," Claire said. "I heard the truck." Mia unfolded the blanket. It was dark green with red stitching along the edges, worn thin in several places. "Dad used this in his car." Claire hesitated. The blanket was one of the few belongings recovered after Aaron Morgan's vehicle went through a guardrail during a snowstorm 18 months earlier. Aaron had been 41, broad-faced and strong, with sandy hair, a patient temperament, and the stubborn belief that any broken system could be repaired if someone stayed late enough. He had worked as a county fire safety inspector and spent his free time repairing radios, volunteering at shelters, and teaching Mia how to read topographic maps. The official report said he had driven too fast on black ice. Claire had accepted the conclusion because grief had left her too exhausted to fight it. Mia spread the blanket on the floor several feet from Ranger. The dog's nose lifted. He smelled it from a distance, then slowly dragged himself toward it. Once his chest touched the wool, some of the tension left his shoulders. Claire looked at her daughter. "Stay near the door. Don't reach for him." Mia nodded and sat cross-legged with her sketchbook on her knees. Claire began the examination on the floor. Ranger's temperature was dangerously low. His gums were pale, his heartbeat rapid, and his skin lacked the elasticity of a properly hydrated animal. She started warm intravenous fluids through a vein in his front leg, then wrapped heat packs in towels and positioned them around his body. "He's severely underweight," she said. "Not from being lost for a few days. This happened over months." Ethan knelt beside Ranger's head. "What else?" Claire parted the fur around the dog's neck and ankles. Pale lines crossed the skin beneath the coat. Some were old and smooth. Others remained red and inflamed. "Restraint scars," she said. Something narrow and reinforced was repeatedly tightened around his legs and throat. Her fingers moved carefully down Ranger's front paws. Between two toes, she found a small puncture surrounded by yellow bruising. Then another, and another. "Injections?" "Yes. Placing needles here hides the marks beneath the paws." Whoever handled him did not want them easily seen. Ranger trembled when she touched his right hind leg. Claire took portable X-rays while he remained on the blanket, allowing Ethan to hold his head and Mia to sit within view. The images appeared on a monitor mounted near the wall. A metal plate ran along the femur, secured by 6 screws. Ethan leaned closer. That repair was done before the explosion. Claire enlarged the image. Tiny markings became visible near the upper edge of the plate. She read them aloud. R417. Medical Working Dog Inventory Code. Ethan stared at the screen. Ranger's military identification had been R417. For 4 years, Ethan had fought the possibility that grief had distorted what he saw on the road. The torn ear, the private signal, and Ranger's recognition had already convinced his heart. The number on the plate convinced everything else. "It's him," he said. Claire did not offer comfort. She simply nodded. "Yes, it is." While checking Ranger's shoulder, she found a hard swelling beneath the skin. The surrounding fur had been clipped recently and had only begun to grow back. A ragged incision crossed the area, closed with uneven black thread. "That is not a standard identification chip," Claire said. She passed a handheld scanner over it. Instead of displaying a registration number, the device emitted a repeating pulse. Claire retrieved a broader frequency detector from a cabinet. A green light began flashing the moment she brought it near Ranger's shoulder. "It's transmitting." Ethan's expression hardened. "How far?" The device itself might only reach a nearby receiver, but if it connects to a relay, the signal could be followed from much farther away. Mia had stopped drawing. She was staring at the black raven emblem Ethan had placed on the counter after cutting Ranger's collar away. "I've seen that bird," she said. Claire turned. "Where?" "In Dad's notebook." The room went still. Mia opened her sketchbook and drew the outline from memory. Spread wings, lowered head, sharp tail feathers. It matched the metal emblem almost exactly. "He drew it 3 times, Mia continued. "Next to a warehouse inspection. He wrote that the doors were marked wrong, and the animal permits didn't match the building plans." Claire's face changed. The professional calm remained, but something colder moved beneath it. Aaron had spent the week before his death inspecting private facilities north of the lake. He had refused to discuss the details, saying only that one company was hiding more than fire code violations. 2 days later, his truck had gone through the guardrail. Claire looked from the raven emblem to the transmitter under Ranger's skin. For 18 months, she had told herself Aaron's death was an accident because the alternative was too large, too dangerous, and too uncertain to carry. Now a military dog, officially dead for 4 years, lay on her husband's blanket, marked by the same symbol Aaron had drawn before he died. Outside, the storm pressed against the clinic windows. The detector continued blinking. Someone was still searching for Ranger. And Claire was no longer certain Aaron had died by chance. The signal detector continued blinking beside Ranger's shoulder while Claire stood motionless beneath the treatment room lights. Ethan watched her study the raven emblem on the counter, then glanced toward Mia's drawing of the same symbol. Neither of them needed to say what had changed. A few minutes earlier, Ranger had been a wounded dog carrying evidence of abuse. Now he was connected to the final investigation Aaron Morgan had conducted before his death. Claire crossed the room and picked up the clinic phone. "I'm calling Lucas," she said. "If someone is tracking this dog, I want the sheriff involved before we remove anything." Ethan did not argue. He remained beside Ranger, while Claire contacted the county office and explained only that she had found an active transmitter inside an injured animal linked to military records. She avoided mentioning Aaron's notebook over an unsecured line. 25 minutes later, headlights swept across the clinic's frosted windows. Sheriff Lucas Reed entered through the rear door, stamping snow from heavy boots. At 43, Lucas was a broad, athletic man with dark skin, closely cropped black hair, and a square face made less intimidating by deep laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a brown county uniform beneath a thick patrol jacket, with a service pistol secured at his hip and a small scar across his chin from a childhood sledding accident Ethan still remembered causing. Lucas and Ethan had grown up 2 houses apart, fought beside each other in schoolyards, and stopped speaking regularly only after Ethan returned from military service. Lucas had learned not to push. He understood that Ethan's silence was not rejection, but armor, and he had always waited nearby without demanding that the armor come off. "You look worse than the storm," Lucas said. Ethan glanced at Ranger. "He looks worse." The sheriff's expression changed when he saw the dog on Aaron's blanket. Lucas removed his gloves and crouched without approaching too closely. "This is the one you lost?" "The one they told me was dead." Lucas looked toward the X-ray monitor. "Then let's see what the dead have been doing for 4 years." Claire showed him the plate number, the restraint scars, the hidden injection sites, and the transmitting device beneath Ranger's skin. Lucas photographed everything using a county evidence camera, then called a state veterinary investigator to establish a proper chain of custody. He was careful, methodical, and irritatingly patient.
Ethan remembered that same patience from childhood fishing trips, when Lucas could sit beside a motionless lake for hours, while Ethan changed bait every 10 minutes.
"The plate number is military property," Lucas said. "I can request verification through the federal liaison system, but I need a formal statement from you." Ethan gave him the essential facts: Ranger's service code, the explosion at the Eastern European training facility, the evacuation, and the death notification. He described the private "come home" signal and the torn left ear. He did not describe the years of waking with Ranger's last bark trapped in his head. Lucas did not ask him to. The sheriff submitted the request from Claire's office while the storm rattled the old firehouse windows. The response arrived faster than expected. A secure military veterinary record confirmed that working dog R417 had sustained a fracture of the right femur during an extraction mission 5 years earlier.
The injury had been repaired at a United States military hospital in Germany using a 6-screw surgical plate. The manufacturer code, dimensions, and screw arrangement matched Claire's X-ray exactly. Beneath the surgical report appeared a second entry, dated 11 months later. Presumed killed during an accidental explosion at a multinational training compound. No remains recovered. File closed. Ethan read the words twice. They closed his medical status 48 hours after I was evacuated. Lucas leaned against the desk. That was fast without a body. The site was unstable. That explains why they did not recover him. It does not explain why they stopped asking where he was. Lucas expanded the search to customs and agricultural transport records. Most results were routine shipments, but one entry appeared 4 days after Ranger's official death. A private company named Black Ridge Canine Defense had transported a male German Shepherd from Germany to the United States through a special veterinary exemption. The dog was listed as approximately 4 years old, sable-coated, unchipped, and recovered as a stray security animal near a damaged foreign training installation. No military tattoo was recorded. No original handler was named. 4 days, Ethan said. He was alive 4 days after they declared him dead. Claire's jaw tightened. And someone removed his identification before transport. Lucas opened the company profile. Black Ridge Canine Defense operated private training facilities across the Northeast and held contracts for security patrol dogs, detection animals, and overseas consulting. Its public materials showed polished kennels, uniformed handlers, and executives shaking hands beside American flags. The company's founder appeared in the center of nearly every photograph. Grant Holloway was 54, tall and heavily built, with silver blonde hair combed neatly away from a broad forehead and a trimmed beard that softened an otherwise predatory face. His pale eyes appeared friendly in photographs without ever looking warm. He dressed like a man who wanted to resemble both a retired soldier and a corporate benefactor. Expensive field jackets, polished boots, and a black raven pin on his lapel. His biography described him as disciplined, patriotic, and committed to giving working dogs a second purpose. Ethan stared at the image until the treatment room seemed to tilt. "I know him." Lucas turned. "From where?" "The training compound, the morning before the explosion." Ethan remembered Holloway standing beside the kennel entrance in Eastern Europe, speaking with a logistics officer Ethan had never met. Grant had not worn a uniform, but everyone had moved around him as though he outranked them. A black raven had been pinned to his coat. Ethan had asked who he was, and been told he represented a private veterinary contractor.
He watched Ranger during the obstacle drill, Ethan said. Not the team, Ranger. He asked how often Ranger ignored unfamiliar handlers.
Lucas saved the photograph. Did you speak to him?
Briefly. He said a dog that loyal was either priceless or dangerous.
Ethan's hands closed slowly.
The explosion happened the next day.
A soft scraping sound came from beneath the treatment counter. Ethan turned and found Ranger awake, his muzzle pressed against something brown. One of Ethan's leather gloves had disappeared from the chair beside him. Ranger had dragged it onto Aaron's blanket and tucked it beneath his chin. The dog watched Ethan without moving, his eyes tired but faintly defiant. For the first time that night, Ethan felt something other than anger. During deployment, Ranger had stolen his gloves whenever Ethan spent too long cleaning equipment instead of resting. The dog would hide one and wait for Ethan to negotiate its return with dried meat.
You still steal, Ethan murmured.
Ranger's tail tapped once against the floor. Mia smiled from the doorway.
Maybe he remembers more than being hurt.
Ethan sat beside the blanket and let Ranger keep the glove. The old habit did not erase the scars, but it proved Blackridge had not taken everything. Beneath the fear and the exhaustion, Ranger was still choosing familiar mischief. He was still himself. Mia quietly slipped away while the adults reviewed the records. Claire noticed her absence only when a heavy object struck the floor upstairs. She hurried into the apartment above the clinic, with Ethan and Lucas following. They found Mia kneeling beside an open metal toolbox in the small room Aaron had used as an office. Papers, electrical fittings, measuring tools, and old inspection tags surrounded her. Claire stopped in the doorway.
What are you doing?
Mia held up a narrow brass key and a folded topographic map.
Dad hid these beneath the bottom tray.
Claire's face reddened with anger sharpened by fear.
You had no right to open that box. I told you not to investigate this alone.
You weren't investigating at all. The answer struck harder than Mia intended. Claire flinched, then looked away. Mia unfolded the map across the floor. 3 coordinates had been circled in red pencil. Beside one was the raven symbol, drawn in Aaron's hand. Another note read, "Inspection access does not match county plan. Lower structure concealed." Claire sat slowly on the edge of the desk. Her anger remained, but denial no longer had anywhere to stand.
He told me the inspection was routine, she said. The week he died, he stopped sleeping. He checked the locks twice every night and kept looking through the windows.
Lucas photographed the key and map without removing them from Mia's hands. "These are evidence now. We do this properly." Mia nodded, though her expression made clear that obedience and agreement were not the same thing. The clinic phone rang downstairs. Claire returned to answer while Lucas secured Aaron's materials in an evidence envelope. Ethan remained near the staircase, listening.
"Morgan Veterinary Clinic," Claire said.
A man's voice responded, smooth and professionally calm. "Dr. Morgan, my name is Peter Vance. I represent Blackridge Canine Defense." Peter Vance sounded middle-aged, educated, and practiced in the art of making threats resemble administrative requests. "We have reason to believe a company animal was brought to your clinic tonight," he continued. "The dog is injured and may be dangerous. Blackridge personnel are prepared to retrieve our stolen property." Claire's eyes hardened.
Animals are not property when ownership depends on a falsified military death record. Silence followed. The voice lost a degree of warmth.
"You are not qualified to interpret classified transfer documentation. Do not remove the tracking unit.
Do not contact outside agencies, and do not allow the animal to leave. Interference may expose your clinic and your family to unnecessary risk. Ethan descended the final steps and stood where Claire could see him. She placed the call on speaker. Lucas activated his recorder. "Mr. Vance," Claire said, "you have just admitted that you know about a device implanted in a dog you claim is harmlessly registered to your company." The line remained quiet for 2 seconds. Then Peter Vance said, "This is your only opportunity to cooperate." The call ended. Ranger lifted his head from Ethan's glove and stared toward the dark clinic windows. The transmitter beneath his shoulder continued to pulse. Blackridge had found the clinic quickly, knew exactly which dog was inside, and believed fear would make Claire surrender him. Ethan looked at the Raven emblem, Aaron's hidden map, and Grant Holloway's smiling photograph on the computer screen. 4 years earlier, someone had written Ranger out of the world. Now the same people wanted him returned, before his survival could rewrite the record. The coordinates Aaron had marked led north of town, past the last occupied houses and into the lower slopes beneath Whiteface Mountain. By late afternoon, the ice storm had weakened into a hard, steady snowfall, but the roads remained dangerous. Lucas drove an unmarked county SUV while Ethan sat beside Ranger in the rear compartment. Claire had argued against moving the dog so soon, yet Ranger had become frantic the moment Ethan approached the door without him. In the end, she had wrapped the injured leg, fitted him with a padded support harness, and warned Ethan that courage did not protect damaged joints. Mia remained at the clinic with Claire under the watch of a deputy. The brass key and Aaron's map were sealed inside an evidence pouch on Lucas's dashboard. The route ended at an abandoned cable car station built into the mountain above an old ski trail. The station had once carried tourists toward the upper slopes, but a mechanical failure and years of neglect had left it closed for more than a decade. Snow covered the collapsed ticket booths, and rusted cables disappeared into the gray sky. The main structure was a long concrete building with shattered windows and a roof bowed under ice. "Aaron inspected this place?" Ethan asked. Lucas checked the map. "Not officially. The coordinates match, but county records say the property has been unused since the ski company went bankrupt." Ranger stood with difficulty when the rear door opened. His nose tested the air, then his body tightened. He recognized something. Ethan clipped the support lead to the harness. "Easy. You choose the pace." Ranger moved toward the station, favoring the right hind leg, but pulling with purpose. Lucas kept one hand near his holster as they followed a trail of partially covered footprints around the side of the building. Someone had arrived before them. Inside, the abandoned station smelled of frozen dust, rust, old grease, and animal disinfectant. That final scent did not belong there. Ranger stopped beside a row of broken lockers and growled at a dark doorway leading into the machinery hall. A woman stepped into view with both hands raised. Dr. Naomi Price was 47, tall and thin enough that her heavy black coat seemed to hang from her shoulders rather than cover them. Her straight blonde hair had been cut roughly at her jaw, as though she had done it herself without a mirror, and wire-framed glasses sat unevenly across a narrow face exhausted by sleeplessness. She had once possessed the composed confidence of a respected veterinary surgeon. Now, every movement carried caution. She watched doors before people and stood with the tense balance of someone accustomed to sudden danger. "Ethan Cole?" she asked. Ethan did not lower his stance. "Who are you?" Her gaze moved to Ranger, and the color left her face. "My name is Naomi Price. I worked for Blackridge Canine Defense." Ranger's growl deepened. Naomi stopped moving. She did not reach for him or speak his name. "He remembers me," she said. "Is that supposed to make me trust you?" "No. It should make you careful." Lucas identified himself and asked Naomi to show her hands, pockets, and any weapons. She carried only a prepaid phone, a flashlight, and a small medical pouch. Once Lucas was satisfied, they moved into the former control room where steel walls offered better protection from the wind. Naomi placed a folder on an overturned desk. Inside were copies of veterinary transport forms, altered identification records, and photographs of dogs wearing numbered collars. "Blackridge did not rescue stray animals from war zones," she began. "Grant Holloway selected military and police dogs with exceptional records. He looked for confusion, explosions, collapsed facilities, wounded handlers, units transferring between commands.
Then people inside procurement or logistics changed the records. Declared them dead, Ethan said.
Naomi nodded. Or unsuitable for service. Sometimes they were listed as euthanized. Identification chips were removed, tattoos damaged, and transport papers rewritten. Then Blackridge moved them under private veterinary exemptions. Lucas studied the documents. Where did the dogs go? Mining operations in South America. Private security teams in unstable regions. Wealthy clients who wanted trained protection animals. Some were leased to armed contractors operating where local law could be bought. Naomi's voice remained controlled until she looked at Ranger. The dogs who obeyed unfamiliar handlers were valuable. The ones who resisted were subjected to reconditioning. Ethan's hand tightened around the support lead. Ranger felt the change and pressed closer to his leg. What did they do to him? Naomi removed her glasses, cleaned them with a shaking hand, then put them back on. Ranger refused an attack command during a private demonstration. The target was an unarmed civilian worker who had panicked and run. Ranger intercepted the trainer instead. He bit through the padded sleeve and knocked him down before the man could activate the shock collar again. A brief, fierce pride moved through Ethan despite the horror surrounding it. Ranger had known the difference between a threat and a frightened person. Grant called it handler rejection, Naomi continued. He ordered restricted food, repeated sedation, electric correction, and isolation. They called the program behavioral reconditioning. It was punishment until the dogs stopped making independent choices. Ranger's restraint scars, hidden injections, and terror of the metal table became one complete picture. Ethan crouched beside him and rested a hand beneath the torn ear. He didn't stop choosing. Naomi's mouth trembled. No, he never did. She explained that she had joined Blackridge 7 years earlier after leaving a university surgical program. Grant had promised advanced rehabilitation work for injured service animals. At first, Naomi treated genuine working dogs with legitimate contracts. By the time she understood the larger operation, she had already signed altered medical documents. Fear, money, and shame kept her silent. I told myself I was keeping them alive, she said. That lie became easier every time I repeated it. Ranger's femur had failed during forced training 18 months earlier. Naomi repaired it using a military surgical plate left from an overseas contract. Grant instructed her to remove every identifying mark. I ground down the external label, she said. But the internal manufacturer code and service number were too deep. I left them because I knew one day the body might become evidence. Ethan looked at her coldly. One day, he suffered for 4 years while you waited for the right day. Naomi accepted the accusation without defending herself. Yes. Lucas placed Aaron's inspection notes beside her files. Tell us about Aaron Morgan. Naomi recognized the handwriting immediately. Aaron had inspected a Black Ridge warehouse 6 weeks before his death. Officially, the building stored veterinary equipment. In reality, it held transport cages, sedatives, and dogs awaiting shipment. Aaron discovered that the emergency exits shown on county plans did not match the interior walls. A concealed lower level had been built behind a false storage partition. He photographed restricted medications and copied several transport numbers before Black Ridge security removed him from the property. "He contacted me afterward," Naomi said. "He thought I was only a staff veterinarian. He asked why a warehouse needed restraint tables and kennel drains beneath the floor." "Did you tell him?" Lucas asked. "Not enough. I warned him to stop asking questions." Aaron refused. He planned to meet a state investigator, but 2 nights later his vehicle went through a guardrail during a storm. Naomi had later seen a Black Ridge maintenance invoice for repairs to a company truck on the same date. The report mentioned damage to the front bumper and passenger side light. "I cannot prove Grant ordered the crash," she said, "but I do not believe Aaron lost control by himself." Ethan felt Ranger shift before he heard the sound. A faint metallic click came from the upper window. Ranger lunged sideways, striking Ethan's legs as the glass exploded. A rifle round punched through the wall where Ethan's chest had been. Lucas drew his weapon and dragged Naomi behind the old control console. Another shot struck the concrete floor, scattering frozen dust. "Shooter on the eastern ridge," Lucas said. The attacker was briefly visible through the broken glass. A lean man in white winter camouflage, his face hidden beneath a gray mask, and his movements controlled like those of a trained marksman. He changed position immediately after firing. Naomi pointed toward a hatch beneath the machinery panel. "Maintenance tunnel. It exits below the loading platform." Lucas forced the rusted latch with the brass key. They descended into a narrow concrete passage while bullets struck the station above. Ranger moved ahead despite his injury, following airflow and old scents through the darkness. The tunnel emerged beneath the rear platform near a line of snow-covered trees. Ethan saw the shooter moving downhill toward a snowmobile. Ranger pulled hard against the lead, gathering himself to pursue. For one instant, the old working drive overcame weakness and pain. Ethan loosened the line instead of ordering him forward. "Your choice, partner." Ranger watched the fleeing man. Then a crack sounded from the station roof as ice and timber collapsed behind Ethan. The dog turned immediately, moved back to Ethan's side, and placed himself between him and the exposed slope. The snowmobile engine roared away through the trees. Naomi stared at Ranger. Black Ridge spent years trying to teach him that obedience mattered more than judgment. Ethan rested his hand against the dog's neck. They failed. Lucas photographed the snowmobile track and recovered a spent rifle casing from beneath the loading platform, but the shooter had already disappeared into the storm. Naomi gave Lucas her files, her phone, and a signed statement. Before leaving the station, Ethan looked back at the broken windows and rusted cables. Aaron had followed the truth to this mountain and paid for it. Ranger had crossed years of captivity, carrying the same truth inside his body. Now Black Ridge knew both witnesses were alive, and the gunman's attack proved the company was willing to kill to keep its dead dogs buried. By the time Ethan, Lucas, and Ranger returned to Morgan Veterinary Clinic, the snowfall had nearly stopped, leaving Saranac Lake beneath a brittle silence. Claire met them at the rear entrance with her arms folded tightly over her scrubs. One look at the fresh snow packed into Ranger's bandage told her that her instructions had been ignored. "You took a hypothermic dog with a damaged femur into an abandoned mountain station," she said. "We walked slowly," Ethan replied. "Someone fired a rifle at us. That does not improve the explanation. Claire's anger was controlled, but Ethan recognized the fear beneath it. Since Aaron's death, she had learned that anger was easier to carry than helplessness. Lucas entered behind them with Naomi's documents sealed inside evidence bags. He had already transferred Naomi to a guarded county building, where she would begin a recorded statement. The shell casing from the station, the altered transport records, and her testimony might support a search warrant against Black Ridge. Claire led Ranger back to Aaron's wool blanket and examined his leg. The joint was swollen but stable. "He needs rest," she said. "So do all of you." Ethan looked toward the dark windows. Rest had become impossible the moment Black Ridge called the clinic. Mia sat at the reception desk with Aaron's topographic map spread beneath a sheet of clear plastic. She had been told not to touch the original evidence, so she had drawn a careful copy in her sketchbook. Numbers and short notes surrounded the 3 marked coordinates. Her auburn-brown hair had been tied into a loose braid, and her face carried the stubborn concentration she had inherited from her father. Claire noticed the drawing and sighed. "Mia, I copied it." "I didn't move anything." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" Mia asked. "Everyone keeps saying Dad's accident might not have been an accident, but nobody tells me what I'm allowed to know." Claire's expression tightened. Ethan expected her to send Mia upstairs. Instead, she pulled out a chair. "You are allowed to know that your father found something dangerous and tried to report it. You are not allowed to place yourself in danger trying to finish his investigation." Mia looked down at the page. "Those sound like different rules for adults and children." "They are." Lucas almost smiled, but his phone vibrated before he could speak. The smile vanished as he read the message. His first warrant request had been delayed because an attorney representing Black Ridge had contacted the county legal office before the supporting documents were fully submitted. "Someone leaked it," Lucas said. Only 4 people in the county system knew the company name. Ethan glanced toward Ranger. "Then they know Naomi survived. And they know we have records." At 10:17 p.m., every light in the clinic went out. The heating system stopped, the refrigerator compressors fell silent, and the backup alarm gave one broken chirp before dying. Lucas drew his pistol. Ethan was already moving toward the rear hall. "Generator?" he asked. Claire reached beneath the reception desk for a flashlight. "Automatic. It should have started." Ranger raised his head from the blanket. His nose lifted, drawing in air from beneath the doors. A growl rolled from his chest. Then came the smell of smoke. It entered through the ventilation grates in a thin, oily ribbon. Claire's face changed instantly. "The rescue ward." She ran toward the converted garage where the clinic housed abandoned animals during winter. Ethan followed, but the hallway door slammed inward before they reached it. A man in a black snow jacket rushed through the smoke, carrying a compact pistol. He was in his mid-30s, narrow-faced and wiry, with a shaved head and a pale scar curving beneath his left eye. Later they would identify him as Mason Pike, a former private security handler whose record showed repeated complaints for excessive force. Even before Lucas shouted a warning, Mason moved like a man accustomed to solving problems through intimidation. He raised the weapon toward Ethan. Ranger launched from the blanket, despite his injured leg, and struck the man's forearm before he could fire. The pistol discharged into the ceiling. Ethan caught Mason by the coat and drove him against the wall while Lucas kicked the weapon away. A second intruder appeared at the far end of the hall, taller and heavier, his face covered by a gray scarf. He threw a metal canister into the rescue ward, and orange flame climbed the wooden partition almost instantly. "Get the animals out,"
Claire shouted. The ward held 2 elderly dogs, 4 cats, a recovering owl, and a crate containing 3 6-week-old German Shepherd puppies surrendered earlier that week. Claire opened the exterior kennel doors while Lucas restrained Mason with plastic cuffs. Ethan grabbed a fire extinguisher and forced his way toward the flames. The second attacker fired once through the smoke, missed, and retreated toward the damaged alarm panel. Ethan discharged the extinguisher across the doorway, filling the corridor with white chemical fog. Ranger tried to follow him, but his burned strength faltered. "Stay with Claire," Ethan ordered. Ranger remained only because Claire knelt beside him and held Aaron's blanket near his face. One by one, they carried the animals through the rear exit into the fenced yard. Claire tucked the cats into transport cages while Lucas dragged Mason outside and secured him to the clinic's steel railing. The owl struck its wings against a towel in Claire's arms. The elderly dogs coughed, but kept moving. Then Claire looked around. "Where is Mia?" Mia had reached the rear door with the others when she remembered Aaron's original notebook was still inside the upstairs office. The notebook contained inspection dates, diagrams, and the numbers he had written during his final weeks. Fear that the fire would erase the last evidence of her father's courage overpowered every warning she had been given. She slipped back through the reception room before Claire noticed. By the time she reached the stairs, smoke had filled the ceiling. She found the notebook beneath a loose floorboard in Aaron's office, exactly where the toolbox had rested. A page near the center was marked with the raven symbol and a sequence of numbers under the words, "Snow frequency." Mia tore the page free, pressed it inside her sweater, and started down. Below her, part of the burning ward ceiling collapsed. A wooden beam crashed across the hallway, cutting off the main exit and opening the puppy enclosure. The 3 German Shepherd puppies fled from the flames and crowded around Mia's legs. She gathered them beneath her sweater and crawled behind an overturned metal cabinet as burning fragments fell through the ceiling. Smoke erased the room. She tried to call for her mother, but the sound became a cough. Outside, Ranger suddenly tore free from Claire's weakened grip. His nose swept the snow near the exit, then turned toward the building. "Ranger, no!" Ethan shouted. The dog plunged through the smoke before anyone could stop him. His front paws crossed burning debris, scorching the pads, but he did not slow. Ethan wrapped a wet blanket around his shoulders and followed. Ranger moved beneath the smoke line, tracking Mia's scent through ash, disinfectant, and melting plastic. He found her behind the cabinet, curled around the 3 puppies while pieces of ceiling struck the floor nearby. Ranger lay across her legs and shoulders, covering both the girl and the puppies with his body. A burning strip of insulation landed along his back. He shook it away but refused to move. "He found me!" Mia cried when she saw Ethan's light. Ethan reached the fallen beam and tried to lift it. His damaged shoulder screamed beneath the weight. Claire appeared behind him with a steel kennel bar. Together, they used it as a lever while Lucas pulled from the other side. The beam shifted enough for Ethan to crawl beneath it. He lifted Mia first and passed her to Claire, then carried the puppies inside his coat. Ranger attempted to stand, but his burned paws folded beneath him. Ethan returned and lifted him through the opening seconds before another section of ceiling collapsed. Firefighters arrived after Lucas used his patrol vehicle's emergency transmitter, and they contained the flames before the entire clinic was lost. The rescue ward and Aaron's upstairs office were badly damaged, but every animal survived. Claire treated Mia for smoke inhalation and a cut along her forehead before turning to Ranger. The pads of his front paws were blistered and red, and a narrow burn crossed his shoulder. He continued trying to crawl toward Mia until Claire placed his blanket beside the examination mat,
where the girl sat wrapped in an oxygen mask. "He is not leaving me," Mia said. "Apparently, none of you understand medical instructions," Claire replied, though her voice broke. She cleaned Ranger's burns while Ethan stood nearby, already asking Lucas how quickly they could reach Blackridge. Claire slammed the bottle of antiseptic onto the table. "He just ran through a burning building on an injured leg. They're moving dogs. And if you turn him back into a weapon before he can recover, how are you different from them?" Ethan went silent. Ranger rested his head against Mia's knee, choosing her over the chase. Lucas questioned Mason beside an ambulance while deputies searched the clinic grounds. Faced with attempted murder, arson, and the recorded Blackridge phone call, Mason's confidence began to fracture. He admitted the team had been ordered to destroy Aaron's records, retrieve Ranger, and make the fire appear electrical. Blackridge was preparing to move its remaining animals before dawn. "How many?" Lucas asked. Mason stared at the snow. "At least 9 working dogs, maybe more." "Where?" "An abandoned ski resort north of Wilmington. The public buildings are empty, but the kennels are below the maintenance level." His partner had escaped in a dark truck after disabling the clinic's generator and alarm. Mason also confirmed that Blackridge had been warned about the warrant by someone connected to the county procurement office. Mia removed the scorched page from inside her sweater. Beneath the raven symbol, Aaron had written 12 numbers divided into 3 groups. Claire recognized none of them. Lucas photographed the page and read the label aloud. "Snow frequency." Ethan looked toward the dark mountains beyond the burned clinic. Whatever the numbers meant, Aaron had believed they mattered enough to hide. Before dawn, 9 captive dogs would be moved beyond their reach. Blackridge had burned the clinic to destroy the past, but Ranger had carried Mia and one final message from Aaron out of the fire. At 2:38 in the morning, Lucas Reed stood inside the smoke-damaged reception room of Morgan Veterinary Clinic and spoke through an encrypted video connection to Judge Evelyn Hart. Hart was 61, a narrow-faced state judge with short white hair, rimless glasses, and a reputation for distrusting convenient explanations. She had spent 2 decades prosecuting public corruption cases before joining the bench, and she listened without interrupting as Lucas presented Naomi's statement, Ranger's military records, the tracking implant, the attack at the abandoned station, and Mason Pike's confession. The local warrant process had already been compromised, so Lucas bypassed the county office entirely. When he finished, Judge Hart removed her glasses and looked directly into the camera. "You are requesting authority to enter a private facility before daylight based on evidence that someone inside local government may be assisting the target." "Yes, Your Honor." "Then nobody outside your operational team receives the address until you are already moving." She signed the warrant electronically. Search authority covered the abandoned ski resort, all underground structures, veterinary storage, communication systems, vehicles, animals, and financial records. Lucas read the order twice before allowing himself to breathe. State police arrived 20 minutes later under the command of Captain Lena Ortiz, a 46-year-old woman with a compact athletic build, black hair braided tightly at the back of her head, and a steady expression that made panic seem embarrassing. Ortiz had begun her career as a mountain rescue officer and had lost a partner during a rushed winter entry 12 years earlier. Since then, she planned operations with relentless patience, refusing to confuse speed with carelessness. She studied Aaron's map, Mason's description of the resort, and Naomi's memory of the underground layout. The public entrance would be watched. The old service road could be blocked. Naomi pointed to a faded blue line beneath the northern slope. That was a water tunnel before Blackridge converted the maintenance level. It feeds the snowmaking system. The lower gate should still open from the drainage side. Ortiz looked at Ethan.
You know the mountain? Better than most of their drivers. You guide us to the tunnel, then you stay behind my entry team. Ethan glanced at Ranger, whose burned paws were wrapped in padded boots Claire had made from medical foam and canvas. He can identify where they held him. Claire's eyes flashed. He can barely stand for 10 minutes. Ranger rose from Aaron's blanket as if answering for himself. Claire closed her eyes briefly. That does not make this medically responsible. The convoy stopped below the abandoned resort shortly before 4. Its dark hotel tower leaned against the mountain like a dead ship, windows black beneath layers of ice. Rusted chairlifts hung motionless over the trees. Ethan led 2 tactical vehicles along a logging track until the road disappeared beneath snow, then continued on foot with Lucas, Ortiz, Naomi, and Ranger. Claire followed with 2 veterinary technicians and emergency supplies, establishing a treatment station inside an old equipment garage near the tunnel entrance. Mia remained at the mobile command center several miles away, under the supervision of Deputy Karen Bell, a calm, broad-shouldered officer in her early 30s who had once taught middle school science before joining law enforcement. Mia objected until Claire reminded her that the clinic fire had already proven how quickly bravery could become recklessness. She carried Aaron's scorched page, a radio, and a copied map. "You stay where I can reach you," Claire said, "and you do not improvise." Mia looked at Ethan. Adults keep saying that right before they improvise. Even Ortiz almost smiled. The water tunnel began behind a frozen retaining wall. Lucas used the brass key from Aaron's toolbox on an old service lock. It turned with a metallic crack. Inside, the air smelled of mineral water, rust, mold, and something sweeter beneath it. Veterinary sedatives. Ranger entered beside Ethan with his nose low. Every few yards, he stopped and listened to vibrations traveling through the concrete. The tunnel opened into a mechanical room filled with inactive pumps and snowmaking controls. Beyond it stood a reinforced steel door with fresh electrical wiring. Naomi entered a 6-digit code she remembered from her employment. The lock released. The underground level bore no resemblance to an abandoned resort. Fluorescent lights illuminated sealed corridors, stainless storage cabinets, floor drains, and rows of ventilation ducts. One room contained shelves of anesthetics, tranquilizers, stimulants, and controlled pain medication. Naomi moved between the labels, naming substances purchased under false veterinary license numbers. These quantities could not be justified by legitimate treatment, she said. Some were used to sedate dogs during transport. Others kept them responsive while blocking pain. An evidence officer photographed invoices and lot numbers. Several purchase forms listed clinics that had closed years earlier. Claire arrived with her technicians and examined the storage logs. They created medical records for animals that officially did not exist, she said. Then they bought drugs for patients nobody could audit. Farther down the corridor, Ranger stopped before a blue door. His body lowered until his belly nearly touched the floor. His breathing became fast and shallow. The support line trembled in Ethan's hand. Scratches covered the lower half of the steel, and black burn marks surrounded a cable port near the frame. Naomi's face tightened. Electrical conditioning room. Behind the door, Black Ridge handlers had restrained dogs on a rotating platform, issued attack commands, and punished hesitation with electric current. Ranger backed away so violently that his injured leg collapsed beneath him. Ethan caught the harness before he struck the floor. Ortiz signaled her officers toward a parallel passage. "We can enter around it."
Ethan unclipped Ranger's lead. Naomi stared at him. He may run. Then he runs. Ethan crouched several feet away, keeping his hands open. He did not say heel, forward, or search. For years, other people had turned every doorway into a test of obedience. Ethan refused to make this one another command. You don't have to go in, he said quietly. Ranger looked at the blue door, then toward the tunnel behind them. His muscles shook beneath the sable coat. Ethan waited. At last, Ranger stepped forward once, then again. He crossed the threshold by choice. The room contained metal restraint frames, shock control panels, padded attack suits, and a drainage channel darkened by years of use. Ranger circled the nearest platform, sniffed it, and turned his back on it. Then his head lifted toward an air vent on the opposite wall. A faint sound traveled through the duct, one dog barking, then several more answering. Ranger moved to a service corridor hidden behind a sliding equipment rack. Ortiz's team forced the latch and discovered a second kennel block beyond it. 9 working dogs were confined inside individual concrete cells. 2 German shepherds stood rigidly against the rear walls. A Belgian Malinois spun continuously in a tight circle. An elderly black Labrador lay without lifting his head. Several wore shaved patches where identification chips had been removed. Others bore scars from restraints and electrical collars. No one opens every cage at once, Claire ordered as her team arrived. She established a triage system using colored tags: red for immediate medical danger, yellow for stable but injured, and blue for animals requiring behavioral isolation. Her voice remained calm, even when a frightened shepherd struck the cage door with its teeth. She covered the gate with a blanket, reduced the light, and waited until the dog's breathing slowed. Naomi identified each animal from memory where possible, giving former service numbers, known injuries, and the names Blackridge had assigned them. Ranger lay outside the Malinois' cage without staring directly at him. After several minutes, the circling stopped. The younger dog lowered himself near the bars, matching Ranger's breathing. At the command center, Mia listened to radio traffic while studying Aaron's snow frequency sequence. The 12 numbers were not coordinates. She recognized the pattern from the lessons Aaron had given her on emergency communication. 3 radio frequencies, followed by channel switching intervals. She entered the first frequency into the command receiver. Static answered. The second produced a repeating data pulse from somewhere inside the resort. The third revealed a low-power maintenance transmitter beneath the snowmaking control room. "It isn't a message," Mia told Deputy Bell. "It's a locator." She transmitted the discovery to Lucas. Officers searched beneath the control room and found a false floor concealed under compressor equipment. The hidden archive contained burned fragments of transport forms, payment ledgers, military veterinary files, and photographs of dogs before their identification marks were removed. Aaron had hidden a waterproof evidence envelope inside a wall panel, but the compartment was empty. A recent note had been taped across it in Grant Holloway's handwriting. "You should have stayed on the road." Tire tracks behind the resort showed that a vehicle had left less than an hour earlier. Naomi examined the missing file index and understood what Grant had taken, a copied ledger linking the stolen dogs to buyers, officials, and false death certificates. By dawn, all 9 dogs had been moved to Claire's treatment area. None had been left behind. The underground facility was secure. The illegal drugs and falsified records were in police custody, and Aaron's investigation had finally been proven real. But Grant Holloway had escaped with the one piece of evidence capable of exposing the entire network. Ethan stood beside Ranger at the mouth of the water tunnel as pale morning light spread across the mountain. Ranger's legs trembled from exhaustion, Yet when Ethan offered the lead, the dog did not pull toward the departing tire tracks. He turned back toward the rescued animals instead. Ethan followed him. For that moment, saving the living mattered more than chasing the man who had tried to erase them. The tire tracks behind the abandoned resort curved east toward Lake Placid, cutting through fresh snow before joining an old utility road. Lucas ordered Captain Ortiz to remain with the rescued dogs and secure the underground facility, while he took 2 patrol vehicles after Grant Holloway. Ethan helped Ranger into the rear of Lucas's SUV, but before they could leave, a shout rose from the water tunnel entrance. Naomi was gone. An evidence technician had last seen her walking toward the equipment garage to identify a box of veterinary files. One state officer lay unconscious beside the service door, alive but bleeding from a blow to the temple. His radio and sidearm were missing. Security footage showed Grant emerging from a maintenance passage that had not appeared on the resort plans. He had seized Naomi, taken a black weatherproof hard drive case from the hidden archive, and escaped in a gray utility truck moments before officers sealed the upper road. The stolen drive contained the customer list, payment records, and names of officials who had helped Blackridge falsify military death certificates. Grant was no longer running only to protect himself. He was carrying the evidence that could destroy the entire organization. Mia remained inside the mobile command center with Deputy Karen Bell, listening to the pursuit over an encrypted radio. Erin's scorched notebook lay open across her knees. One page showed a hand-drawn diagram of an old hydroelectric station on the western shore of Lake Placid. Erin had inspected the facility 2 years earlier, after Blackridge leased one of its abandoned storage buildings. Beside the drawing, he had written 3 emergency frequencies and a warning. Remote spillway control still active. Ice unstable when gates open. Mia pressed the transmission key. Sheriff Reed, Grant may be heading to the old Sentinel Hydro Station. Dad marked it in the notebook. Lucas checked the road map. The utility tracks were already turning toward the lake. How certain are you? Certain enough that Dad underlined it twice. Lucas accelerated. The old hydroelectric plant stood beneath a rocky ridge where the frozen lake narrowed around a concrete spillway. Built in the 1930s, it had been abandoned after newer turbines replaced its equipment, but the control house and emergency gates remained connected to the regional water system. Snow covered the low brick structure, and rusted power lines sagged between wooden poles. Grant's truck had crashed through the outer chain and stopped near the lake. The driver's door stood open. A trail of blood and footprints crossed the snow toward the spillway platform. Claire contacted Ethan through his headset from the veterinary staging garage. Her voice was calm, but he heard exhaustion beneath it. Satellite images show current moving under the western half of the lake. If Grant opened the old release gates, the ice near the spillway will weaken first. Can you tell where it's safe? Stay close to the northern shoreline. Avoid dark patches, exposed reeds, and any place without snow cover. Clear ice is stronger than white ice, but none of it is reliable near running water. Ethan looked at Ranger. The German Shepherd stood inside the SUV, wearing his padded boots and support harness. His burned paws and damaged hind leg had already endured more than Claire considered safe. He stays with the vehicle, she said, anticipating Ethan's decision. Ranger pushed past him as soon as the door opened. He disagrees. Ethan, that dog is not equipment. I know. He clipped the lead loosely to the harness. That's why I'm letting him choose. Lucas activated his body camera before advancing toward the plant. Ranger led Ethan along the edge of the building, nose low and ears forward. Inside, broken windows admitted strips of winter light across rusted turbines and oil-dark floors. A smear of blood marked the stairs leading to the upper control room. Naomi's voice came from beyond the machinery hall. "The drive won't save you, Grant." A pistol fired into the ceiling. Dust fell from the rafters. "The next shot won't be a warning," Grant answered. They found him on the spillway platform, with one arm locked around Naomi's throat. Grant's polished appearance had deteriorated since the photographs Ethan had seen. His silver blonde hair hung wet across his forehead. One side of his expensive field coat was torn, and blood darkened his sleeve where he had cut himself escaping the resort. Yet his pale eyes remained controlled. Men like Grant treated fear as something that happened only to other people. Naomi stood in front of him, her glasses missing and a bruise forming along her cheek. In his free hand, Grant held a pistol. The black hard drive case was clipped to his belt by a steel cable. Below them, the spillway gates began to move. Ancient machinery groaned beneath the concrete. Water surged under the frozen lake, sending thin cracks racing outward from the platform. "Turn it off," Lucas ordered. Grant smiled. "The controls are locked remotely. In 10 minutes, this section of ice breaks apart, the drive disappears into the outlet channel, and Dr. Price becomes another unfortunate winter accident." Naomi looked at Ethan. "Aaron knew about the backup records," she said quickly. "He convinced me to copy them before he died. I was supposed to meet him the night of the crash." Grant tightened his arm around her neck. "Aaron Morgan was a fire inspector who confused persistence with importance." Lucas shifted slightly, keeping his body camera aimed at Grant. "Did you order his death?" "I told my men to stop him from reaching the state investigator. He chose not to stop." Naomi's face twisted with anger. "They struck his truck on the mountain road." Grant gave a small shrug. "Winter completed the work." Lucas's camera captured every word. Ranger growled. Grant's attention turned toward the dog, and something like satisfaction appeared in his expression. "Ranger," he called in a hard, clipped tone. The shepherd froze. Grant spoke a second phrase in German, followed by a sharp whistle. Ranger's body lowered. His breathing became rapid, and his muscles began to shake. Ethan recognized the reaction immediately. This was not an ordinary command. It was a trigger built through pain, hunger, and repeated punishment. "Attack him," Grant ordered, pointing at Ethan. Ranger stared at his former captor. His lips drew back. One step carried him away from Ethan, then another. Ethan did not tighten the leash. He unclipped it and let it fall onto the snow. "No command," he said quietly. "You decide." Grant repeated the phrase more loudly. Ranger flinched as though struck. For several agonizing seconds, his body seemed divided between terror and recognition. Then he turned away from Grant. Facing Ethan, the German shepherd rose unsteadily onto his hind legs. One paw pressed against his chest, while the other reached toward the man who had waited 4 years for him. "Come home." Ethan's throat tightened. He touched his own chest and extended his hand. "I'm here." Ranger dropped to all fours and crossed the distance to him. Grant's control had failed. At the command center, Mia found the emergency shutdown sequence in Aaron's notes. The numbers marked snow frequency were not only locator channels. The final group corresponded to the hydroelectric gate controls. She guided Lucas over the radio to a rusted junction box beneath the platform. Lucas opened it and entered the sequence. The spillway machinery slowed, but did not stop completely. "Manual lever," Mia said. "Dad drew it beside the lower turbine stairs." Grant heard the transmission and fired toward Lucas. The bullet struck the railing. Naomi drove her heel down on Grant's foot and twisted free. Ranger lunged between her and the gun, forcing Grant backward. Grant ripped the hard drive case from his belt and ran onto the lake. The ice groaned beneath him. Ethan followed along the safer northern edge while Claire warned him away from widening cracks. 10 feet left, she said through the headset. The ice ahead of you is darker. Grant reached the center of a snow-covered patch and turned, raising the pistol. The surface collapsed before he could fire. He plunged waist-deep into black water, striking the ice with both arms. The hard drive case flew from his hand and vanished into a drift near the shoreline. Grant clawed at the breaking edge. "Cole! Help me!" Ethan stopped. 4 years of Ranger's suffering, Aaron's death, the stolen dogs, and the burning clinic stood between them. He could have waited. The current would pull Grant beneath the ice, and no court would ever question why Ethan had failed to reach him in time. Then Ethan saw Ranger watching him. He dropped flat, spread his weight across the ice, and extended the loose support lead. "Grab it!" Grant's fingers slipped once before closing around the strap. Ethan pulled while Lucas anchored him from shore. Ranger seized the trailing section of the harness in his teeth and leaned backward despite his injured leg. Together, they dragged Grant onto solid ice. Ethan rolled him onto his stomach and pushed the pistol away. "You should have let me die," Grant gasped. Ethan held him down until Lucas applied handcuffs. "That would make me someone who treats human lives as disposable. You already proved what that turns a man into." Ranger left them and moved toward the shoreline, nose sweeping beneath the snow. He stopped beside a buried reed bed and began digging carefully with one burned paw. Ethan joined him and uncovered the black hard drive case, wedged against a ridge of ice, but still sealed. Lucas lifted Grant to his feet while the body camera continued recording. Naomi stood nearby, breathing hard but alive. The spillway gates finally stopped as Mia guided an officer to the manual lever inside the turbine room. The frozen lake settled into silence. Grant Holloway was under arrest. His confession had been recorded, Naomi was safe, and the evidence he had tried to destroy rested beneath Ranger's paw. For the first time since the military declared him dead, Ranger was no longer only proof of a crime. He had chosen who he was. 3 months after Grant Holloway was pulled from the frozen lake in handcuffs, the last pieces of Black Ridge Canine defense began to fall. The hard drive Ranger had uncovered near the shoreline contained encrypted payment records, transport schedules, training videos, and the names of officials who had approved false death certificates for military and police dogs. Aaron Morgan's inspection files proved that Black Ridge had concealed kennels beneath buildings registered only as equipment warehouses, while Naomi Price's testimony explained how identification chips had been removed and veterinary records rewritten. Lucas Reed worked with state and federal investigators to connect every document to a witness, every transaction to a dog, and every order to the person who had signed it. Grant was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, contract fraud, obstruction of justice, animal cruelty, and theft of government property. Several Black Ridge executives were arrested, along with 2 procurement officials who had accepted payments to declare valuable working dogs dead. Mason Pike agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, confirming that Grant had ordered the attack on Aaron's truck and later authorized the fire at Claire's clinic. The case spread beyond New York as investigators searched Black Ridge properties in 3 other states and recovered more stolen animals. Some had been missing for years. Others were still young enough to remember the handlers from whom they had been taken. Naomi accepted responsibility for her years at Black Ridge. She pleaded guilty to falsifying veterinary records and assisting illegal transports, but prosecutors recommended a reduced sentence because she had preserved Ranger's surgical number, released him from the transport vehicle, protected Aaron's evidence, and helped rescue the imprisoned dogs. She did not ask to be described as a hero. During her final statement, she said fear had explained her silence, but had never excused it. Claire submitted a letter to the court, describing the lives Naomi had ultimately saved, while also acknowledging the damage caused by her earlier choices. Accountability, Claire wrote, did not require pretending people were only the worst thing they had ever done. Naomi lost her veterinary license for several years and entered a supervised animal welfare program where she helped investigators identify other dogs from Black Ridge photographs. It was not freedom without consequence, but it was a path toward becoming useful again. Aaron Morgan's name was formally cleared in early spring. The county corrected the accident report to state that his vehicle had been deliberately struck while he was attempting to deliver evidence of criminal animal trafficking. At a public ceremony in Saranac Lake, Lucas presented Claire and Mia with Aaron's restored inspection badge and a commendation recognizing his courage. Mia stood beside her mother, wearing the gray sweater she had worn the night Ranger arrived at the clinic. She had grown more confident in the months since the fire, though grief still appeared in unexpected moments. In a familiar song, the smell of her father's wool blanket, or the sight of tire tracks disappearing into snow. When she spoke at the ceremony, her hands trembled around the microphone. "My father did not die because he was careless," she said. "He died because he saw living creatures being treated like objects, and he refused to look away." Claire closed her eyes as applause filled the room. For 18 months, she had feared Aaron's final act had been a mistake made on an icy road. Now Mia understood that he had chosen to protect those who could not speak for themselves. The truth did not return him, but it restored the meaning of his final days. Ranger's military identity required a separate investigation. A Navy veterinary officer arrived at Ethan's lakeside cabin carrying the original surgical file, photographs from Ranger's service years, and a corrected record bearing the designation R417. The officer was a reserved woman in her early 50s, with close-cut gray hair, a precise posture, and the quiet respect of someone who had spent her career treating working animals as fellow service members rather than equipment. She compared the plate number, dental records, torn ear, and old mission scars before signing the document that legally returned Ranger to Ethan. The Navy offered specialized rehabilitation at a military facility, but Ranger had already made his preference clear. He slept only when Ethan was in the room, followed Claire without fear during medical examinations, and waited each afternoon for Mia's school bus. Ethan requested permanent custody and immediate retirement. During a private ceremony on the cabin porch, the officer attached Ranger's restored service tag to a new leather collar. Ethan knelt in front of him and rested a hand beneath the torn left ear. "You've done enough," he said. "No more missions." Ranger touched the scar beneath Ethan's thumb with his nose, then stole one of Ethan's gloves and carried it behind the porch bench. The officer laughed. Ethan did too. Healing remained slower than justice. Ranger still woke when engines passed at night. Metal tables made him retreat, and the smell of certain disinfectants caused his entire body to tense. Claire treated his burned paws and damaged leg on the floor, never forcing him onto a surface he feared. One of the 9 dogs rescued from the resort, a young female German shepherd named Willow, refused contact with nearly everyone. Willow was smaller than Ranger, with a black saddle, amber eyes, and a thin white scar crossing her muzzle. She had learned to expect pain
whenever a door opened, and would hide behind her kennel wall when anyone approached. Yet she trusted Ranger. When he lay outside her enclosure, she moved closer. When he drank, she drank. When he slept with his back exposed, Willow slowly learned that rest did not always invite punishment. Claire agreed to foster her at the clinic, though Mia began calling her a permanent resident before the paperwork was completed. Ethan changed alongside the dogs. At Lucas's insistence, he attended a weekly therapy group for veterans in Lake Placid. During the first meeting, he sat near the exit and said nothing. During the third, he admitted that he had spent 4 years believing Ranger's death was proof that everyone who depended on him would eventually be lost. The group did not offer easy answers. They spoke about survivor's guilt, broken sleep, anger, and the fear of building a life that might be taken away again. Ethan gradually understood that isolation had never protected him. It had only ensured that pain had no witness. Claire sometimes drove him to the meetings after long clinic shifts. Their relationship grew without declarations or dramatic promises. She did not ask him to forget Ranger's lost years, and he never asked her to put away Aaron's photographs. They learned to share quiet dinners, difficult memories, and the ordinary responsibilities of caring for 2 traumatized German shepherds and 1 determined 13-year-old girl. Love entered their lives carefully, not as a replacement for those they had lost, but as proof that grief had not closed every door. By summer, the burned rescue ward at Claire's clinic could no longer hold the animals needing long-term care. Ethan owned an unused repair barn and 7 acres near his cabin. Lucas knew a veterans foundation searching for a regional service project. Mia drew a sign before any of the adults had officially agreed. It showed Ranger standing with one paw against his chest and the other extended toward a small house, beneath the words, Second Watch Canine Recovery Center. Volunteers rebuilt the barn with quiet kennels, heated floors, wide doors, outdoor runs, and examination spaces without reflective metal tables. Claire designed the medical wing. Ethan built a workshop where veterans could repair engines and equipment while recovering dogs learned to rest nearby. Lucas organized grants and security. Mia created a wall containing photographs and stories of the animals whose identities had been restored. At the center of that wall, she placed Aaron's portrait beside his inspection badge. She told every visitor that her father had discovered Blackridge because he believed safety rules existed to protect lives, including lives hidden behind locked doors. The center opened during the first snowfall of the following winter. Veterans, law enforcement handlers, veterinary workers, and local families gathered beneath warm lights while snow covered the fields outside. Willow remained close to Ranger, but no longer hid when strangers entered. Claire stood with one hand resting on Mia's shoulder. Lucas brought coffee that Ethan claimed was unfit for human use. When the speeches ended, Mia held up a small piece of dried meat. "Ranger," she called, "come home." Ranger looked toward Ethan. Then he rose onto his hind legs, pressed one front paw against his chest, and extended the other toward the 3 people waiting for him. The movement was no longer a desperate signal made in a deadly storm. It was a familiar joke shared among a family. Ethan touched his chest and reached back. Ranger dropped down, crossed the floor, and leaned against them while the room filled with laughter. That night, after the visitors had gone, snow continued falling outside the center. Willow slept near Mia's chair. Claire rested beside Ethan on the old couch, Aaron's photograph visible on the wall across from them. Ranger lay near the fireplace with Ethan's glove beneath one paw. For the first time since returning, he did not wake when the wind touched the windows.
His breathing remained deep and steady as the fire settled into glowing embers. Beyond the glass, the mountain disappeared beneath white darkness. Inside, the lights of Second Watch remained on, guiding veterans, wounded dogs, grieving families, and every lost soul still searching for a safe place to return. Ranger's story reminds us that being lost does not mean being forgotten. Even through pain, fear, and years of darkness, God can still lead wounded hearts home. Ethan, Claire, Mia, and Ranger all carried scars, but those scars became part of something greater, a new family, a place of healing and hope for others. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Could you forgive Grant after everything he caused? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, comment Amen. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Warm Light Tales for more powerful stories about faith, courage, and the bond between people and animals.